Welcome to the Weaver Sews. I'm Daryl Lancaster. I recently finished creating this jacket and I've had a lot of requests for how I did it. So let's dive in. In the fall of last year, I participated in a virtual Weaving Guild workshop with Jennifer Moore called Rainbow Double Weave. Double weave, in case you aren't a weaver, allows 2 layers of cloth to be woven simultaneously. There are advantages to being able to weave cloth in 2 layers, especially for design purposes. You can switch which layer appears on the top. It's a pretty cool technique, one I actually explored way back in college in the 1970s. I wove this with 1 layer in black and the other brown, and switched them every few inches, creating tubes which I stuffed with jute. It was a 1970s thing. With multiple shafts, you can create blocks side-by-side layers that can switch places independently of their neighbor. In this rainbow double weave workshop, the rainbow part has to do with the rotation of colors in the warp, which get to play on each other in a rainbow effect. Rather than invest in more yarn specific to the project, I used what I had, which was 8 to 10 cell, because I had the group of colors needed, or close enough. 8 to 10 cell is much finer than the recommended 5-2 pearl cotton, so with the teacher's approval, I set up my loom at 48 ends per inch. That would be 24 ends per inch for each layer. I also put 4 yards of warp on the loom because, well, she recommended that. Yardage gives you lots of opportunity to play, to experiment, and to try different combinations and layer effects. My goal after the holidays was to finish weaving off this sampler. Because of the size yarn I used, the sampler was much narrower than what others had made in the class. So by now, most of you know that right before the holidays, I fractured my shoulder in 2 places in a bad fall. It's pretty devastating for a hand weaver. I have about 40 shaft looms of various sizes and configurations, but this is the loom that I really wanted to weave on, since I had another project in mind. So, with a fractured shoulder, still in a sling, I sat at the loom and thought. One of the challenges doing this type of sampler on a floor loom was retying the treadles after every sample or design option. Well, this is pretty next to impossible to do with only 1 arm. Getting up and down on the floor and reaching in to change the treadle pins, it was pretty much out of the question. The bad news was there were 2 shuttles, 1 for each layer. The good news was that because of the finer yarn, the warp was narrower and the shuttles were wider than the sampler. That meant that on a loom with a good shuttle race, that's the ledge directly in front of the beater, I could push each shuttle through and it had a place to rest while my same arm could reach over, grab it, and then beat. I decided to accept whatever design option was set up on the treadles and just weave off whatever pattern I had on the loom at that moment, which ended up giving me 2 matching fronts. At that point, there was at least a couple of yards left of warp. And so, determined to do this, I sat at that loom all through the month of January with 1 arm, weaving about 6 inches a day. And Mulder stood guard when I wasn't weaving. It was no small feat, and it meant the world that I could still weave. When those knots came up over the back, you could hear the squeals of delight all the way across the country. My social media following is so supportive. And so now I had this 3.5-yard long, 9-inch wide, colorful sampler that, because it was double weave, was equally beautiful on the reverse side. I wanted to do something with it. I make clothing. Everything I touch is a potential ingredient in a garment. This 9-inch wide sampler proved to be challenging because not only was it narrow, but there were lots of design changes through it, and I wanted to see both sides. As a sidebar, since you can't see the bottom layer while you're weaving it, it's quite common to find a mispick or weaving error on the opposite side. I was lucky. In 3.5 yards, I only had to correct 2. I got inspired by a patchwork jacket I saw online. I hated the look of this particular jacket, which is a shirt jacket, but dividing the sampler pieces with windows of a solid fabric made sense. And I loved the idea of the zip front of this jacket because that could be reversed if I could find a suitable reversible zipper. And so I chose for the body my 800 vest, which could also be reversed like I did on this little vest, leaving out the zipper. And of course I wanted sleeves. And making a jacket reversible with a shaped cap set-in sleeve is more complicated. So I wanted a drop shoulder shaped sleeve and armhole. I overlaid the 1700 armhole from my Tunic pattern onto the body of the 800 vest. And that allowed me to use the drop shoulder sleeve from the Tunic pattern. Because the 800 pattern assumes that you will be binding to the center front edge, there is no seam allowance in that center front. So I had to add that as well. The length of the jacket would be determined by how much fabric I had to work with. I mean, I only needed 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeter turn up at the bottom. I had this leftover length of a silk wool suiting from a gown I made for my best friend's wedding back in 2004. I chose it for the color of a good latte. I no longer fit in that gown and was willing to sacrifice the fabric for a good cause. And it turns out I had just enough from the leftovers to cut the back, fronts, sleeves, and collar. I wanted this jacket reversible, which meant that I needed something for the reverse side. And I found just enough of this wool suiting in a slightly different shade left from another project. How to figure out what parts of the double weave sampler to put where proved to be a challenge. I really didn't want to start cutting up the sampler because once I cut, I couldn't uncut. So I sat with a scanner and a color printer and a pin every 10 inches and scanned the entire length of the sampler in sections and printed it so I could cut up the scans and not the sampler until I was sure. Yeah, I used a lot of ink. If I changed my mind, I just needed to tape the scan back together and cut it in a different place. Next time, I'll show you how I actually created the windows for this amazing jacket and take you through the final construction. I'm Daryl Lancaster for the Weaver Sews.